At 8:17 on a Friday night, Imani Taylor was kneeling on a marble floor with a white cloth in one hand and a half-empty champagne glass in the other when the lower corner of a portrait frame shifted above her. The Franklin Museum of American Art was full of people who had been told not to touch anything. They stood beneath soft lights with small plates balanced on their palms, speaking quietly about color, value, and family collections. Imani had spent 11 years working in rooms like that after everyone else went home. She knew how fast a room could become dangerous when people with money forgot that someone else would clean up after them. A woman in a silver dress had bumped the rope line while reaching for her drink. The stanchion leaned. The portrait trembled inside its heavy black frame. Imani saw the loose backing board before anyone else did. She rose fast enough to catch the board as it came away from the bottom edge. It was light cardboard, not the painted surface. Still, the sound it made against her hands was enough to turn every face in the gallery toward her. Then something yellow slipped through the opening. It landed between the polished shoes of the donors and slid across the floor until it touched the toe of Imani's work sneaker. For a moment nobody moved. The paper was a child's drawing, the lines were thick and uneven. A little black girl stood in the middle of it wearing a cobalt blue dress with round white dots along the collar. Her hair was gathered into two small bows. One hand was lifted, as if she had been caught in the middle of a wave. Above Imani, inside the portrait, was the same girl. The painted version was older in the face only because oil paint had made her seem serious. The blue dress was the same. The bows were the same. Even the small tilt of her left shoulder was the same. In the corner of the drawing, written in crayon with a child's determined hand, were 3 words. Maya Rowe, 7 Imani, looked from the paper to the portrait. Then she heard a man behind her say, "That is packing material. Give it to Mr. Voss, now." Dr. Julian Ashford stood near the gallery entrance in a dark tuxedo jacket and a museum badge that caught the light whenever he moved. He was Franklin's executive director, the kind of man whose voice stayed smooth even when he was angry. He was a black man with a reputation for bringing money into rooms that had been leaking it for years. Imani had watched him shake hands with school groups, trustees, painters, city officials, and TV reporters. He always seemed to know exactly when a person needed to feel seen. Tonight, he was looking at the yellow drawing as if it had ruined something expensive. Graham Voss stepped away from the portrait. He was in his 40s, neat in the way some men were neat, because they had never needed to carry anything heavy. The portrait was from his family collection. Its small gold wall label called it Blue Sunday, L. Ward, circa 1982. "You touched the frame," Graham said. Imani still held the backing board away from the painted canvas. "I caught what fell. You should have stepped back, then it would have hit the floor." Julian came closer. He did not raise his voice. That was part of what made people listen when he did not want them to. "Miss Taylor, give the paper to Mr. Voss's assistant. We need to reset the display." Imani looked down at the drawing again. It had come from inside a lone portrait. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was an old piece of paper that had been forgotten by a framer, but she had spent too many years working in buildings where people made things disappear by calling them nothing. "It needs to be written down first," she said. Julian's expression barely changed. "Excuse me, where it came from?" "The paper. It fell out of the frame. Somebody should write that down before anyone takes it." There was a small pause in the room. It was not silence exactly. A glass touched a tray. Someone near the far wall breathed out through their nose, but Imani could feel the shape of the pause. It was the moment when people decided whether a worker had spoken too much. Graham reached toward the drawing. Imani moved it only an inch, not away from him, but toward the museum security officer who had come through the door. "I am not keeping it," she said. "I am asking for a record." The security officer, a woman named Renee, who had worked Franklin's evening events for years, looked at Julian before she looked at Imani. Then she looked at the loose backing board, the drawing, and the wall label. "I need photographs for the incident log," Renee said. Julian's jaw tightened. "It is a loose scrap of paper," he said. "It came from the loaned work," Renee replied. "I will be quick." Renee placed a small evidence card beside the drawing and photographed the front. She turned it over with gloved fingers. On the back was a faded purple stamp, almost rubbed away. Harbor Arts Saturday class. Imani did not know what that meant. She only knew that Julian had gone very still. Renee photographed the back, slipped the drawing into a clear sleeve, and wrote Item B on a temporary tag. Imani watched the yellow paper disappear behind plastic. "There," Julian said. "Now the gallery can continue." But the gallery did not continue for Imani. He turned to her with the same polished calm he used when he spoke at staff breakfasts about teamwork. "Your supervisor will be in touch," he said. Imani held the backing board out to Renee. "Am I supposed to finish the floor?" Julian did not answer her question. He looked toward the facilities manager from HarborWorks, who had arrived near the entrance looking pale and confused. Miss Taylor is done for the evening, Julian said. Please make sure she leaves the gallery level. Imani knew that sentence. It was not a request, it was the kind of sentence a client gave a contractor when they wanted a person removed without saying the word fired in front of guests. She set the cloth and champagne glass on a service tray. Then she walked past the portrait one last time. The girl in blue looked straight ahead from her gold label. She did not look frightened. She looked like someone had told her to sit still and trust the grown-ups to remember her name. Outside the museum, the wind off the harbor pushed cold rain against the parking lot lights. Imani sat in her car with both hands around the steering wheel before she turned the key. Her phone buzzed with a message from her HarborWorks supervisor. Do not report for your next shift. We will contact you in the morning. Imani read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the passenger seat. She was 43 years old, a black woman with a careful eye who worked overnight because it paid a little more and let her be home when her daughter Nola came back from school. She knew which gallery lights needed an extra minute to warm up and which loading dock door stuck in February. Her job was not glamorous, it was steady. Steady meant rent paid on time and Nola's Saturday art class stayed possible. She started the car at 8:46 knowing that one yellow drawing had just put all of that in danger. Nola was still awake when Imani got home. Their apartment was small but orderly, with a narrow kitchen and a folding table beneath the window where Nola kept construction paper, old magazines, and paint pens. Nola was 15 and quiet in the way teenagers often became when they were thinking about 10 things they did not want to explain. She looked up from a collage of cut-out city buildings when Imani came in. You are early, she said. I know. Did something happen? Imani took off her damp coat. She could have said no. She could have waited until morning, when things might look smaller. But Nola had always known when her mother was trying to carry a heavy thing alone. A frame came loose at work, Imani said. A drawing fell out. The director did not like what I asked for. Nola frowned. What did you ask? For somebody to write down where it came from. Nola looked at her for a second, then looked back at the collage on the table. That seems normal. It does to me too. The termination email came at 9:12 the next morning. HarborWorks called it an immediate separation based on a client complaint. The language was neat and cold. Unauthorized handling of a loaned artwork, disruption of a donor event, failure to follow direction from museum leadership. There was no accusation of stealing. There did not need to be. A clean job reference could disappear just as easily under words like disruption. Imani read the message at the kitchen table while Nola got ready for school. Then she called HarborWorks and asked for an internal appeal. The woman in human resources sounded tired, not cruel. She told Imani the appeal would not guarantee anything, but it would let her respond to the complaint. Imani said she understood. She asked for the materials HarborWorks had relied on. 3 days later, a packet arrived in an email link. It contained Julian's complaint, the HarborWorks manager's note, and a brief final museum report. The final report said the frame had been stabilized. It said the employee had interfered with a donor event. It said no loose material had been associated with the work, but attached behind it was an earlier security field log. Imani had to read it 3 times before she saw the line. Item B, loose drawing, photographed. Secured pending collections review. There was a photo number beside it. The image opened slowly on her screen. It showed the drawing on the marble floor beside the evidence card. The portrait hung above it, blurred but unmistakable. On the next image, the paper was turned over. The faded stamp on the back was clearer than Imani remembered. Harbor Arts Saturday class. Nola came home from school while Imani was still staring at it. That is the girl from the painting? Nola asked, setting down her backpack. I think so. And the museum report says the paper was not there? Yes. Nola pulled out a chair but did not sit. So what are you going to do? Imani did not answer right away. She had spent enough years being practical to know that asking another question could make a bad situation worse. She needed a job. She needed a reference. The cleanest thing would be to appeal her termination, say the report was wrong, and leave the portrait to people with titles after their names. But the stamp kept looking back at her from the screen. I am going to ask one person what it means, she said. That is all. Harbor Arts Center stood 6 blocks from a bus stop on a street Imani had driven past for years without noticing. The building had once been a neighborhood school annex. Its brick walls were painted with bright murals of musicians, gardeners, dancers, and children holding books over their heads. The front desk was empty when Imani walked in, but an older man was taping a flyer to a community board near the hallway. He had a bent posture and a navy cardigan with paint on one cuff. When Imani asked whether anyone knew about Harbor Arts Saturday class, he studied her face before he answered. I did, he said. I ran it for a long time. Elias Bell. Imani showed him the photograph on her phone. She did not hand him any record. She did not say the museum's name at first. She only pointed to the faded stamp. Elias adjusted his glasses. That stamp was on everything the children made, he said. We used it because parents kept asking whose paper was whose after class. Celeste liked that. She said names were a kind of fence. They kept people from walking off with what did not belong to them. Imani felt something tighten in her chest. Celeste who? Celeste Rowe. Elias looked at the photograph again, then he looked at the portrait in the background. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Where did this come from? Imani told him enough. A museum, a loose frame, a drawing of a girl named Maya, a report that later said the drawing did not exist. Elias did not give her an address. He did not reach for a phone book. He only nodded once, slowly. Maya was Celeste's daughter, he said. Little thing with 2 blue bows most Sundays. Celeste painted her once, I remember, because she would not let the child sit still for more than 20 minutes. She had to let Maya draw beside her. Do you know where Maya is? I know how to ask her if she wants to be found. He stepped into a small office and made a call. Imani stood in the hallway beside a faded poster for a youth printmaking program. She could hear only one side of the conversation. Maya? It is Elias. No, nothing happened to your mother. I know she has been gone a long time. Listen, a woman is here. She found a drawing with your name on it. It was inside a framed painting at Franklin Museum. Elias paused. His face changed. Then he said, yes, the blue dress. When he returned, he held the phone out to Imani. She wants to speak with you, he said. The woman's voice on the line was low and careful. My mother said that painting never came back. Maya Rowe said. Imani looked through the center's front windows at the afternoon buses moving along the street. I do not know what it means yet, she said. I only know someone tried very hard not to write down that the drawing came from it. There was silence on the line. Then Maya said, come by tomorrow. I have something you should see. Maya's kitchen was warm with the smell of ginger tea and old paper. Books stood in the corners and framed photographs covered the walls. The room held many things that had been kept. Maya was 51, with silver beginning at her temples and a calm face that made her seem taller than she was. She listened while Imani told the story from the beginning. She did not interrupt until Imani reached the words on the front of the drawing. Maya Rowe 7, Maya repeated. Then she opened a drawer beside the stove and took out a folder wrapped in a dish towel. Inside were children's drawings yellowed at the edges. A house with a purple roof. A woman with a wide smile. A street full of trees drawn too tall. Each one had the same hard-pressed letters in the corner. Maya Rowe. She spread them beside the photo from the museum. That is mine, she said, not loudly, not happily, just certainly. Her finger rested near the blue scallops at the bottom of the dress. My mother made that dress from a skirt someone gave her. She added the white dots because I said plain blue looked sad. I used to count the dots when I had to sit still. Imani looked at the drawing again. There were 11 white dots on the collar. In the portrait above the museum floor, there had been 11 white dots too. Maya rose and crossed to a cabinet near the refrigerator. From the back, she brought out a photograph inside a clear sleeve. It showed a younger Celeste Rowe standing at an easel in a room filled with afternoon light. Her hair was tied in a cloth at the back of her head. 7-year-old Maya sat on a stool in the cobalt blue dress, looking impatient and proud. Behind the easel, the first shapes of the portrait were visible. She painted it in 1982, Maya said. She called it Blue Sunday because she said I looked like I had already forgiven the whole world for making me sit still. She gave a small laugh, but it broke before it became one. Then she opened an old envelope marked Voss Gallery. The letter inside was simple. It acknowledged receipt of Blue Sunday for framing and preview only. There was no amount, no sale language. No signature transferring anything away. My mother took it there because they said they could frame it and show it to people who bought art, Maya said. The next year, Harbor Arts had an exhibition. The painting was there. I remember standing in front of it with my mother while Elias took pictures of all the children. She looked down at the intake letter. After that, the gallery said it needed to go back for collection review. Then calls stopped being returned. The gallery changed hands. My mother did not have money for lawyers. She had work, students, and me. So she kept saying she would find it when she had time. Did she ever see it again? Imani asked. Maya shook her head. Not that I know of. For a while, both women looked at the letter. Imani had come expecting a name. She had found a woman whose mother had spent years waiting for a painting to come home. The difference mattered. A name was a question. A person was a responsibility. What do you want to do? Imani asked Maya, folded the intake letter with great care, and placed it back in its envelope. I do not want anyone to hand me a painting because I am sad, she said. I want them to stop calling another man's work my mother's. I want the museum to keep it safe until someone looks at what is there. The next call was Maya's to make. Elias gave her the name of a small arts legal clinic that helped community artists organize records and find counsel. Maya spoke to them herself. The clinic did not promise a victory. It asked Franklin to hold its own display, movement and alteration of Blue Sunday, and it notified Voss that Maya disputed any private sale while the evidence was reviewed. 2 days passed before anyone answered. Imani checked her email too often and did not sleep enough. HarborWorks said the client complaint was under review. Nola stopped asking for news and left a new box of paint pens unopened on the kitchen table. On the third afternoon, Maya called. "The board is putting a temporary hold on the display," she said. "They are letting a conservator look at the frame. They said the museum has a loan file." Imani sat down at the table. "What does the file say?" "The official story starts in 1986, Voss Family Collection, L. Ward. It does not say anything about my mother or the gallery letter." "And before 1986? "They do not have it, or they say they do not." That was the first time Imani understood that the portrait had been living inside a story with a missing beginning. Naomi Green was the museum's senior conservator. She had not been at the donor preview, but she had been called when the condition report came across her desk. She was a black woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and a way of speaking that made every word sound placed rather than dropped. Maya met her at the museum with a clinic advocate beside her. Imani waited in the public lobby near the coat check because no one had invited her into the collections area, and she knew better than to force her way into a room that was not hers. Naomi came out 40 minutes later holding a folder against her chest. "I can tell you what I saw," she said. "I cannot tell you who owns the painting. I cannot tell you the whole history from one label." Maya nodded. "What did you see?" "A newer paper label on the backing board. Beneath its edge, there is an older label. I did not remove anything. I documented what is visible." She opened the folder just enough for them to see the photograph. The old label was partly covered, but the words were clear. Harbor Arts Center, Celeste Row, Blue Sunday, 1982. Maya put one hand over her mouth. Imani felt the floor beneath her shoes become strange and far away. It was not because the label solved the whole story. Naomi had just said it did not. But the painting itself had carried Celeste's name all this time, hidden beneath a cleaner white paper label. "There may be an exhibition record," Maya said. Naomi looked at the clinic advocate. "That is the next reasonable question. Independent records matter. If they exist, they need to be reviewed by someone who is not trying to protect the museum, the lender, or the family claim." Julian passed through the lobby. Then, he saw the photograph in Maya's hand. For a second, his face looked almost tired. "Ms. Rowe," he said, "this is a serious matter. The museum will handle it with care." Maya folded the photograph back into the folder. "It should have been handled with care when the drawing fell out." Julian looked at Imani. "Ms. Taylor, I hope you understand that there are channels for these things." Imani held his gaze. "There were channels when I asked for a record." He did not answer. He walked past them toward the gallery stairs. The city library kept its local arts archive in a basement room where the air smelled faintly of dust and cold metal shelves. The archivist brought out a gray box labeled Harbor Arts Center, Exhibitions, 1981 to 1985. Maya wore cotton gloves because the archivist asked her to. Imani sat beside her and watched the pages turn. At first there were only flyers, attendance lists, grant letters, and photographs of children holding paintbrushes too big for their hands. Then Maya found the exhibition checklist. Harbor Arts Spring Show, 1983. Near the bottom of the second page was the entry, Celeste Row, Blue Sunday, oil on board. There was no L. Ward anywhere on the list. The archivist searched one more folder and found a newspaper contact sheet from the same exhibition. In one square of the black and white film, Blue Sunday hung on the wall beneath a small title card. Celeste stood nearby with her hand resting on young Maya's shoulder. Maya did not cry at first. She only leaned closer to the image as if she could feel the warmth of her mother's hand through the paper. Then she said she was not imagining it. Imani looked at the rows of tiny photographs. Celeste had not been a mystery to herself. She had painted, taught, signed her work, and stood beside it in public. The mystery had begun later, when someone decided a different name was more useful. The clinic sent the checklist and contact sheet to the museum board. This time the answer came quickly. Franklin would retain an independent provenance reviewer. Blue Sunday would remain off display. The board would ask the Voss family collection for the earliest records supporting its claim. That should have felt like relief. Instead, Imani received an email from Julian asking her to meet him at the museum cafe before opening hours. She almost did not go. Then she remembered that people like Julian often counted on silence because silence was easier to manage than a direct answer. The cafe was empty except for a barista wiping down the espresso machine. Julian sat at a corner table with a thin envelope beside his coffee. He stood when Imani approached. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked." He waited until she sat before he spoke. "I want to be clear. The museum is reviewing the matter. I have not asked anyone to ignore evidence. Imani looked at the envelope. Your final report said there was no loose material. The initial description was incomplete. It was a fast-moving event. It was complete enough to fire me. Julian's eyes moved briefly toward the window outside. The museum steps were wet from overnight rain. Harborworks relied on a client complaint. He said, I can speak to them. I can ask that your employment record be changed to a resignation. I can provide a neutral reference. There is also a payment here to cover the shifts you lost. He pushed the envelope toward her. In return, Imani asked, you would sign a confidentiality agreement, and you would confirm that the paper was treated as packing material during the event, nothing more. Imani did not touch the envelope. She thought of the paint pens on the kitchen table. She thought of Nola pretending not to notice that the refrigerator sounded emptier than usual. She thought of how long it could take to find another job that did not ask why she had left Franklin Museum. Julian leaned forward. You are a capable woman, Miss Taylor. Do not let someone else's family history cost you your future. It was a gentle sentence that made it worse. It already cost me my job, Imani said. It does not have to cost you more. She looked at him for a long moment. You want me to say the drawing was nothing? I want you to stop making a workplace complaint into a public accusation. I did not make it public. The report did. It said something was not there when it was. Julian's face changed then, not into anger, but into something closed. You should think carefully, he said. I have, Imani replied. She slid the envelope back across the table. I will not sign a sentence I know is false. When she left, her hands were shaking. She kept them in her coat pockets until she reached the corner. That afternoon, the independent reviewer sent a formal request to the Voss family collection. The request asked for loan paperwork, old inventory lists, correspondence, sales records, insurance appraisals, and any document that could explain why Blue Sunday had moved from Celeste Rowe's 1983 exhibition into a family file under L. Ward. Graham Voss read the request in the office where his grandfather's papers had been stored for years. The room was narrow and over-furnished, with a desk too large for the space and shelves full of books no one had opened since the older man died. Graham had grown up hearing that his grandfather had an eye for art. The story was part of the family furniture. It sat in every room without being questioned. He expected to find a bill of sale, maybe an old appraisal, something with a signature that would turn the whole problem into a misunderstanding. Instead, he found a green ledger with cracked corners and an elastic band around it. On one page, written in fading ink, was an entry from 1986. C. Rowe, Blue Sunday. The name had been crossed out, not erased cleanly. Crossed out with two dark lines. Beside it, in different ink was written L. Ward. There was no price beside either name, no reference to a sale, no bill number, no note saying the work had been bought, gifted, transferred, or inherited. Graham opened every folder around it. He found insurance papers from later years, gallery invitations, and a photograph of his grandfather standing beside Blue Sunday at a charity dinner. He found nothing that explained the change. For the first time, he saw the portrait not as an asset his family had protected, but as a question his family had avoided. His lawyer told him the reviewer needed the ledger. Graham sat alone with it for nearly an hour before he answered. Then he placed it in the outgoing file. The museum board announced an emergency meeting for the following Thursday evening. By then, the story had reached the people who cared about it, not through headlines. Former students called Elias. A teacher sent Maya an old class photograph. Nola listened from the kitchen while Imani explained why she had not accepted Julian's money. Are you scared? Nola asked after the call ended. Imani looked at the small collage Nola had started that week. It showed a row of buildings made from magazine paper, each window cut from a different shade of blue. Yes, Imani said. Nola nodded as if that was not disappointing. You can be scared and still be right. The board meeting took place in a room with rows of folding chairs, a long table at the front, and a glass wall that looked out toward the dark harbor. There were more people than Imani expected. Some had come because of the museum. Some had come because they knew Celeste. Some had come because they understood what it meant to watch a person's name disappear from a thing they had made. Imani sat beside Maya in the second row. The yellow drawing was not on the table. It was secured in the museum's collections room under the temporary hold. But Imani could see it anyway whenever she looked at the framed photograph in her mind. The board chair began with a careful statement about process, evidence, and respect for all parties. Imani did not listen to every word. She had spent too many days waiting for people with authority to decide whether ordinary facts were important. When her name was called, she stood. She did not bring notes. I was cleaning a spill, she said. The rope line was bumped. The backing board came loose. I caught the board, and the drawing fell out. Security photographed it and wrote it down as item B. Later, the report used to fire me said there was no loose material. That is all I know firsthand. The board chair looked toward Julian. Dr. Ashford, why was item B omitted from the final report? Julian sat at the end of the table with his hands folded. The report was prepared during a complicated event, he said. I believe the paper had no established relation to the work and did not want staff speculation to disrupt a donor evening. But it did come from the work, the chair said. Julian did not answer immediately. It came from the frame, he said at last, and the employee was fired based on a report that said it did not exist. Julian's eyes moved toward Imani, then away. Maya stood next. She held the 1982 intake letter and the photograph of her mother at the easel. Her voice shook for the first sentence, then settled. My mother was Celeste Rowe, she said. She taught children at Harbor Arts for 20 years. She painted this portrait of me. She did not have a famous name. She had students, neighbors, paint under her nails, and a daughter who thought the blue dots on a dress were the most important part of the world. I am not asking this board to give me a story. Because I am grieving, I am asking you to stop repeating a story your own records cannot support. Naomi explained what she had seen beneath the newer label. She was precise. She did not say the label decided ownership. She said it connected the object to an earlier public record that required independent review. The library archivist described the 1983 checklist and contact sheet. The reviewer explained that the Voss ledger had a crossed-out Celeste Rowe entry, a substituted L. Ward name, and no transaction record to support the substitution. Then Graham Voss stood. He looked older than he had at the donor preview. Not broken, just less protected by certainty. My family has no sale document for this work, he said. We have no record that answers the questions raised tonight. I have asked our broker to pause the proposed sale. I will provide the reviewer everything we have. No one applauded. The room was too full of history for applause to fit easily inside it. The board voted that night to keep Blue Sunday off display, preserve all related museum records, retain the independent reviewer, and remove Julian from collection decision authority while an investigation examined the altered report and Imani's termination. It was not a verdict. It was not a miracle. It was a door held open long enough for the truth to enter. 8 weeks later, the reviewer finished the first phase of the report. The conclusion did not use dramatic language. It said that the available evidence strongly supported attribution of Blue Sunday to Celeste Rowe. It listed the intake letter, the old frame label, the 1983 exhibition checklist, the contact sheet, Maya's photograph, and the altered ledger entry. It said the Voss collection records did not provide a documented sale or transfer that explained the change in artist name. That was enough for the Voss family to do what the museum had not been able to order. After their lawyers reviewed the record, they reached a voluntary settlement with Maya. Blue Sunday would return to Celeste Rowe's estate. Franklin Museum would pay for conservation and work with Harbor Arts Center on a small exhibition of Celeste's surviving paintings, student materials, and community photographs. Harbor Works rescinded Imani's termination after the security footage and field log made clear that she had caught a falling board after the rope line was bumped. They restored her back pay and seniority, then issued a written correction before assigning her back to Franklin. On Imani's first night back, Renee from security met her near the service entrance. Your badge still works, Renee said, holding it out. Imani took it and looked at the little photograph on the front. She had hated that badge for a while. Now it felt different. Not because the building had given her anything, but because she had not let it tell her that she had imagined what she saw. The Harbor Arts Center exhibition opened on a Sunday afternoon in early spring. Blue Sunday hung in the center of the main room after conservation, its new label named Celeste Rowe. Beneath the portrait was a smaller archival sleeve containing the yellow crayon drawing. The text beside it did not call it evidence or proof. It simply said that Maya Rowe had made it at age 7 while her mother painted her. Children moved through the room with paper cups of juice. Former students of Celeste stood near the walls and pointed at old photographs. Elias Bell sat in a folding chair with a program in his lap, smiling at people who had grown older without forgetting the first teacher who told them their name belonged on their work. Maya stood beside the portrait for a long time before she spoke. She would have hated the fancy lighting, she said. Imani laughed. Maybe, but she would have liked that people can see it. Nola came up beside her mother. She looked at the painted girl in blue, then at the crayon copy below it. The drawing made everyone look, she said. Imani looked at the yellow paper in its clear sleeve. It did, she said. The drawing had not created the truth. Celeste had painted the portrait. Maya had lived the memory. The archive had kept the record, the ledger had kept the lie, but the small piece of paper had refused to stay hidden behind a frame. And because one woman had asked for someone to write down where it came from, a name that had been covered for 40 years was finally spoken in the room where the painting hung.